I found out my son was being picked up from school by someone I had never met. It was a regular Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day that never feels important until it suddenly becomes the one you remember forever. There was no warning, no strange feeling in my chest when I woke up that morning, no sign that anything was about to go wrong. I made breakfast, packed his lunch, reminded him to tie his shoes, and watched him walk into Boonville Elementary like I had hundreds of times before. At the time, it felt like just another day in a quiet Mississippi town where things like this weren't supposed to happen. I work in IT for a regional company, mostly remote, good pay, stable hours. I had built a comfortable life for us after years of struggling as a single mother. Nice house, safe neighborhood, routines that kept everything running smoothly. That afternoon, I was sitting in my home office, headset on, half listening to a meeting about system updates and security protocols. My phone buzzed once on the desk, I ignored it, then it buzzed again, and again. When I glanced down and saw the school's number, my stomach tightened just a little, not from fear, but from surprise. They rarely called. I muted my mic and answered, expecting maybe a question about a permission slip or a reminder about an upcoming event. The woman on the line sounded polite and calm, like she'd made this call 1,000 times before. She said she was calling to confirm my son's pickup for the day. I smiled without thinking and told her yes, everything was fine, that I'd be there at 3:15 like always. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to make my smile fade. Then she said, gently, "Oh, he was already picked up at 2:30. For a second, my brain didn't understand the words. I asked her to repeat herself. She did. Same tone, same time, picked up. I told her that couldn't be right, I was still at work. I hadn't left the house. My car was parked outside, and my son's booster seat was still empty. She apologized and said maybe there was confusion, but then she asked if I knew the person who picked him up. She said a name slowly, clearly, like it should ring a bell. It didn't, not even a flicker of recognition. I felt my chest tighten as I told her I had no idea who that was. She explained that the person was listed on my son's authorized pickup list and had shown valid ID. That's when fear really hit. I told her there had to be a mistake. I said only 2 people were allowed to pick up my son, me and my sister lived hours away. The woman put me on hold to double-check. I stared at my computer screen while my coworkers' voices faded into noise. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When she came back, she sounded less confident. She said the name was definitely on the list and had been added 2 weeks earlier through the school's online portal, signed digitally by me. I hung up without saying anything else. I don't remember ending the meeting. I don't remember grabbing my purse or my keys. I just remember driving, hands tight on the steering wheel, every red light feeling like it was mocking me. Boonville isn't big. That's always been part of its charm. It's the kind of town where people wave at each other, where kids ride bikes without fear, where schools feel like extensions of the community. As I pulled into the school parking lot, that comfort felt like a lie I'd believed for too long. Inside the office, everything looked normal. Too normal. Kids' drawings lined the walls. A teacher laughed somewhere down the hall. The woman from the phone call recognized me immediately. Her expression shifted when she saw my face, pale and tight with panic. She pulled up my son's record on the computer and turned the screen toward me. My name was there, my email address, my digital signature. And underneath it, clear as day, was that unfamiliar name listed as authorized for pickup. I told her I didn't add it. I told her I would remember something like that. I'm careful by nature, maybe overly so. In my line of work, security isn't optional. I use strong passwords, two-factor authentication. I don't reuse logins, I don't click strange links. She listened and nodded, but I could tell she didn't know what to say. From her side, the system showed no errors. Everything looked legitimate. I asked if they had security footage. She hesitated before saying yes and asked if I wanted to see it. I said yes, even though a part of me wanted to run. I wanted to stay in denial a little longer. We watched the footage together in a small office. The camera showed my son walking out of the building, backpack slung over one shoulder, looking relaxed, happy. He wasn't crying, he wasn't scared. He walked straight toward a man standing near the curb. The man bent down to my son's level and said something that made him smile. That image burned into my mind. The man looked ordinary, jeans, baseball cap, nothing about him screamed danger. He took my son's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world and walked him toward a car parked just out of frame. I felt dizzy, like the floor had shifted under my feet. The staff offered me a chair. I sat, but I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. I called my sister first. She was crying before I finished explaining, swearing she hadn't been anywhere near Boonville. I called my ex, even though he'd been out of our lives for years. He didn't answer. Then I called the police. They arrived quickly, which somehow made it feel more real. An officer asked me questions about custody, about family disputes, about anyone who might have access to my email account. When he asked that last one, my stomach sank. I told him no. I told him I was careful. Still, someone had logged in. Someone had added that name. As the questions continued, small memories started surfacing. A man waving from across the street weeks earlier. I waved back, assuming he was a neighbor. My son mentioned someone named Mr. D who gave him a juice box at the park. I'd brushed it off, thinking it was another parent. Each memory felt like a mistake I couldn't take back. Hours passed with no answers, no sightings, no calls. I went home to an empty house that still smelled like breakfast. My son's shoes were by the door, his jacket hung over the chair. Everything felt frozen, like time had stopped for everything except my thoughts. That night, I went through my email account line by line. I found the confirmation message, 2 weeks old, sent at 3 in the morning while I was asleep. The login history showed access from a nearby town less than an hour away. I barely slept. Every sound outside made my heart race. Around 4 in the morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered before fear could stop me. A man's voice came through, calm and steady. He said my name like he knew me. Then he said, "Your son is safe." My knees gave out and I sank onto the floor. He told me not to call anyone else. He said he just wanted to talk. And at that moment, I understood this wasn't an accident. This wasn't random. This had been planned long before that Wednesday afternoon. The man stayed silent on the line for a moment after he told me my son was safe, like he was waiting for me to calm down before continuing. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own breathing. I asked where my son was, but he didn't answer that question. Instead, he told me to sit down somewhere quiet and listen carefully. His voice wasn't rushed or angry. It was steady, almost gentle, and that made everything worse. People who sound like that don't feel like they're doing something wrong. He said he understood that I was scared and that I had every right to be. He told me he wasn't trying to hurt my son, and that if he wanted to, he wouldn't be calling me at all. I didn't trust a single word, but I stayed on the line because the one thing he'd said that mattered was that my son was safe. I asked again where he was. This time, the man said he was somewhere warm, eating dinner, watching television, acting like any other normal evening. The casual way he said it made my stomach turn. I asked him who he was and how he knew my son. He sighed, like the question tired him. He said his name didn't matter, and that what mattered was why he'd done this. He told me he'd been watching our routines for months. Not closely enough to be noticed, but closely enough to learn. He knew what time I left my son at school, what time I picked him up, which days I worked late, which park we went to on weekends. Hearing someone list pieces of my life so easily made me feel exposed in a way I'd never felt before. He told me he wasn't some stranger who'd picked a random child. He said he'd chosen my son because he knew I was a good mother. That sentence made my hands shake. He said he'd watched how I spoke to my son, how patient I was, how I always knelt down to his level when he talked. He said he wanted someone like me to listen to him. I asked him what he wanted. That's when his voice changed slightly, like he was finally getting to the point. He said he wanted me to hear the truth about someone I trusted. I asked who. He told me to think about the people in my life who felt harmless, familiar, easy to overlook. He said danger didn't always come from dark places. Sometimes it came from the places we called safe. My mind raced through names, faces, moments, neighbors, coworkers, parents at school. None of it made sense. I told him he was lying, that he was trying to confuse me. He didn't argue. He just told me to check my email again. Not the login history this time, the sent folder. My chest tightened as I pulled my laptop closer. My hands felt clumsy as I opened the folder and scrolled. At first, everything looked normal. Work emails, school notices, bills. Then I saw a thread I didn't remember sending. The subject line mentioned a volunteer background check. My heart started pounding harder. I opened it and saw emails between my account and the school district, approving paperwork for a part-time volunteer who helped with after-school programs. The name on the paperwork wasn't his, it was my neighbor's. The man on the phone told me to look at the dates. He told me to look at the IP address tied to those emails. They matched the same nearby town as the pickup authorization. He said my neighbor had access to my Wi-Fi. He said I'd given him the password myself months earlier when his internet went out. I remembered it instantly. He'd asked politely. He'd waved often. He'd helped carry groceries once. I felt sick. The man told me my neighbor had been watching my son for a long time, building trust slowly, carefully. He said he noticed things most people ignored. Who talked to who felt alone, who felt overlooked. He said he'd confronted my neighbor weeks earlier when he realized what was happening. Not violently, just words, just warnings. My neighbor had laughed it off, said I was imagining things, said people always see monsters when there aren't any. The man said he didn't believe that. He told me he took my son because the school system made it easy, and because sometimes the only way to make someone listen was to scare them. He said he planned to bring my son back as soon as I understood what was happening. I didn't know whether to believe him, but I listened because I had no other choice. He told me to call the police, but not yet. He said there was one more thing I needed to see. He told me to open a folder on my computer that I didn't know existed. He gave me a path to follow, buried deep, hidden. When I opened it, my breath caught. There were screenshots, messages, photos taken from a distance, conversations my neighbor had been having online about children, about trust, about waiting for the right moment. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Every instinct in me wanted to scream, to smash the laptop, to pretend none of it was real. The man told me he'd sent copies of everything to the police already, anonymously, weeks ago. He said they hadn't acted fast enough. He said he knew what that delay could cost. He told me he grew up in a house where no one noticed until it was too late. His voice cracked when he said that, just for a second, and then it was steady again. He told me he was going to bring my son home now. He said he'd leave him at the police station on the edge of town in 15 minutes. He told me to be there and to let the officers handle the rest. Before I could say anything else, he told me one last thing. He said, "You trusted your instincts today, don't ever stop doing that." Then the line went dead. I drove faster than I ever had, my heart racing with fear and hope tangled together. When I pulled into the parking lot, police cars were already there, lights flashing. I saw my son sitting on the steps, wrapped in a blanket, holding a juice box. He looked up when he saw me and ran. I dropped to my knees and caught him, holding him so tightly I was afraid I'd hurt him. He smelled like soap and something unfamiliar, but he was warm. He was alive. The officers asked questions. My son said the man had been nice, that he'd watched cartoons and eaten pizza, that nothing bad had happened. I listened, numb, while they explained that my neighbor had been arrested an hour earlier after police executed a search warrant. They told me the evidence was overwhelming. They told me I'd done the right thing by calling when I did. In the weeks that followed, Boonville didn't feel small and safe anymore. It felt exposed. People whispered. News spread. My neighbor's house sat empty, curtains closed, like it was ashamed. I changed my locks. I changed my routines. I changed every password I owned. I installed cameras and alarms and checked them obsessively. Sleep didn't come easily. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about the man who took my son and brought him back. I never learned his name. The police told me they tried to trace the call but couldn't. Part of me hated him for what he did. Another part of me knew my son was safe because of him. That conflict stayed with me, heavy and unresolved. My son still goes to school. He still laughs. He still trusts the world in a way I know I never will again. And I let him, because fear isn't something I want to pass down. But I watch more closely now. I listen harder. I don't ignore the small things. Because the hardest lesson I learned wasn't that strangers can be dangerous. It was that the people who smile at you every day can be the ones you never really see. And sometimes, the moment you finally notice is the moment everything changes. If you like the video, please share it with your friends and subscribe to my channel for more real stories like this.